Your upcoming book is
Sure.
titled We Are the Leaders We Have Been Looking For. What can your readers expect when it releases in April of 2024?
Well, it's a different sort of book, right? Typically, my readers think of me as a kind of historian or someone who's offering contemporary analysis with deep, thick historical context. But here I'm putting on my philosophical hat.
Hmm.
I'm trying to understand, the importance, the significance of everyday ordinary people to the functioning, to the well-being of democracy itself. We find ourselves in a moment where we're in trouble. And I think we're in trouble as a democracy because we've been outsourcing our responsibility for it to others. We think politicians can be responsible for democracy. We think leaders, whatever, of civil rights organizations or civic organizations should be responsible for democracy while we get about our own business, our day-to-day lives, right? Well, in we are the leaders we've been looking for. I'm saying can't do that anymore. That the American Republic stands on the precipice. That our democracy is in peril, and if it's going to be saved, it's going to be up to us, the demos, everyday ordinary people. And if that's true, and I think about this specifically, Drew, in the context of Black American politics, we can't outsource that responsibility to some Black leader or to some leader more generally. And if we are to assume that responsibility, we have to do the work of becoming better people, right? We have to engage in self-cultivation, as it were, to reach for higher forms of excellence. I learned this lesson from James Baldwin. Baldwin put it this way. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, of course. He says, it sounds cliche, but I think it's so true, that the messiness of the world is in part a reflection of the messiness of our interior life. And if we're going to build a better world, we have to become better people. So if we are responsible for democracy as such, we also were responsible to reaching for higher excellences, for becoming better people. And so the book explores those two things at once, that we don't need to outsource our responsibility to leaders. We are the prophets we're looking for. We don't need prophets called by God. If we use our imaginations, we can be prophetic in our own work, in our own doing, everyday living. We don't need heroes, right? We don't need the Marvel comic. We don't need the Marvel heroes swooping down on us, saving the day. We need representative human beings, to use Emerson's language. We need representative people who can be heroic in the moment in which they live, in the moment in which they face the problems that threaten their way of life. And we need a conception or an idea of democratic life that affirms the dignity and standing of everyday ordinary people, that democracy is of the people, for the people, and by the people. And to use the language of African American Christendom or American Christendom generally, we need a pew-centered democracy, not a pulpit-centered democracy. We don't need leaders. We need the folk in the pews to take ownership of the direction of the country, as it were.
I sense a link between what you just talked about with outsourcing leadership, outsourcing values, and the conversation that we just had about celebrity culture and outsourcing our image to celebrity. Is that anything that you touch upon in the book?
It's not, I don't specifically talk about celebrities, but I do talk about the way in which heroes can blind us to what we're capable of. So there are three figures that anchor the book.
Hmm.
One is Martin Luther King Jr., one is Malcolm X, and the last is Miss Ella Baker. And these are three of my heroes, going back to the way in which we began our conversation, right? Dealing with who do I take myself to be, grappling with the history that makes me who I am, and asking myself the question, what can I do in a world that has been bequeathed to me, right? And so in the book, I look at these three figures and I say, oh, you get this prophetic voice of Dr. King, but how is it that Dr. King just simply comes to me as a figure that towers over me, as opposed to being an example of how I can use my imagination and be courageous in the moment in which I live, right? Where the prophetic is not something outside of me, where someone is being called by a force outside of our living, but it's actually internal in the very exercise of imagination, or what John Dewey would call dramatic rehearsal, right? Mm-hmm. Malcolm is really important because Malcolm is this figure that I reach for. See, because I'm so wounded, at least I was, I think probably still am. I had this vexed relationship with my father, and Malcolm became this figure that allowed me to express my rage and anger. I have my goatee in some ways as a testament to that conversion experience. And so, but what does it mean to cower before a hero, where the hero is so important, looms so large that To use Emerson's language, you become like a sack in stomach. You just contain what they have as opposed to what you have. And so I have to break loose from that, right? I don't want to be like these folks. And then, of course, Miss Ella Baker, who was so central to the mid 20th century in terms of Black freedom struggles, from field secretary organizing in the NAACP to first executive secretary of SCLC, of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, to helping organize the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee after the student sit-ins. And in April of 1968, Shaw University made possible this organization that was so important among young folk. And here she wants to say a strong people doesn't need leaders, because we are the leaders we've been looking for. So yes, celebrities can become those persons in which we outsource responsibility to, right? We seek to imitate them. They overrun our own voices, our own sense of self. No, 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 no. What I'm trying to argue for, and we are the leaders we've been looking for, is that the prophetic, the heroic or representative, the democratic resides in each of us. That we are the leaders we've been looking for, not Joe Biden, not Donald Trump, not Hakeem Jeffries, not Al Sharpton, not Nancy Pelosi. We are the leaders we've been looking for, and the leaders that democracy desperately, desperately needs.